Greetings, and welcome to another edition of Town Square Video. This is John Hardiman, Public Relations Director for the New Jersey Catholic Conference. Thank you for joining us.
Today, we have the pleasure and honor of speaking with Dr. Kimberly Henkel and Koshute, co-founders of Springs in the Desert, a ministry that is dedicated to spirituality and emotionally accompanying those struggling with infertility and loss. Before we get to know more about Springs in the Desert, let's get to know our guests a little bit better. Kimberly and Ann, just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourselves, your backgrounds, and how your journeys led you to creating this wonderful ministry. And Kimberly, let's start with you.
Okay, so my name is Kimberly Henkel, and I became Catholic in 2004 after a pretty radical conversion. And I decided I just loved RCIA so much. I wanted to learn everything I possibly could. So I started at the JP2 Institute that fall to get a master's in theology. And I just loved it so much that I went on to get a doctorate and at CUA in the area of bioethics, so moral theology, ethics, because that was really what brought me into the church. Was sort of like, how do you know the right thing to do? Like, how do we understand morality? And that's when I began, really searching for God. And anyway, the beautiful teachings of the church just led me right in. And so I went on and did a doctorate in bioethics focus. And one of the areas that I really focused on was the problems with artificial reproductive technologies. So I was speaking about this long before I knew that I was going to be struggling with infertility. So, then I ended up getting married in the midst of writing my dissertation, and my husband and I began struggling. And I realized, okay, God is like really wanting me to walk this out and be a witness to why, to the fact that we're not going to pursue IVF, and that, we're going to trust that God has a beautiful plan for our marriage. I ended up connecting with Ann at a conference at Notre Dame, an ethics conference, a few years later, and kind of shared with her my experience of just really struggling with infertility and just feeling so isolated and alone. And she opened up that she too was struggling in that way. So we began our friendship really deepened at that point, because before that, we really were just kind of acquaintances. So we really began to be much closer and to lean on each other and share our experiences. And we continued talking about, wow, we just wish there was something, organized in the church for this. And so at one point I was invited to write a paper for a Humanum, and an online journal about infertility. And at that point, my husband and I had shifted a bit and were fostering at that point, and we fostered, and then we adopted 3 babies. So we had 3 children all at once. I'm like, Ann, I can't write this paper by myself. Help me. And Ann was, amazing. So we just started working together. And the whole time we're writing this paper, we're like, somebody needs to do something. Somebody needs to do something. And at the end of the paper, we were like, I think we need to do something. So it was like the reluctant, the calling, that we're like, okay, I think, God is calling us to do this. So really inadvertently, we didn't have it mapped out of what we were doing at all. We entitled the paper Springs in the Desert, and thought, well, let's just get a website. We'll just put a website up, Springs in the Desert, and then we'll start a blog. And it just began, people just began to find us and come and join us. And this beautiful team emerged. And then somebody requested that we give a retreat in Philadelphia. So we did that. And then things just started happening and developing.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much for that. And how about you?
Yeah, so my name's Ann Koshute, and I am a cradle Catholic, a cradle Byzantine Catholic. And I actually have a very different background. It's in theater. And so I was a theater major in college, and I worked in the theater for a while, did a number of different things, just kind of, in young adulthood, trying to find my way a little bit. Had a big sort of reversion or reconversion in the faith. And in 2003, the Holy Spirit called me to study theology, and I really don't know where that came from. Other than it was him asking me to do it. And so I found myself at the John Paul II Institute in DC also. So that was the year before Kimberly. Interestingly, the person who was a year ahead of me was Greg Henkel, who would end up becoming Kimberly's husband. So the Holy Spirit just really worked things in an interesting way. So after graduation, I actually worked in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia for a number of years in the family life office. Much of that time spent as a single woman doing marriage preparation. So that was really interesting. And I think also a really amazing preparation for me, as you know, I was helping to work through what marriage preparation looks like, and then meeting so many couples, and eventually met my husband, Keith. We got married a little bit later in life. And so we sort of thought that we might have some trouble conceiving, but we both really wanted to have a family, as many children as God would send to us. So when it started to become apparent that it wasn't just going to be maybe a little more difficult, but that this was going to be really hard and that it might not ever happen, that was really tough. And so at that point that I met Kimberly at that conference, you know, it had nothing to do with infertility. We were just sitting at the banquet that night, and she just opened up, and you know, it was like a light bulb turned on for me, because suddenly I wasn't all by myself in this roller coaster of emotions that I'm sure we'll talk about in this conversation. Just meeting somebody else. You know, I had shared a little bit with some close girlfriends. I didn't really talk about it a whole lot, even with people in my family. But being able to open up to someone who was experiencing many of the same things was really just incredible. It really broke things open for me.
Well, thank you. Both fantastic stories. I was going to ask you about the serendipitous component of your meeting together years after you were students. But you already covered that, so thank you for touching on it. I do think that you know, there was, you know, a higher power at play here to put you two back together. So if you could sum up, you know, the mission of your organization in a few sentences, how would you do that?
So I would say that our mission, our whole purpose is to accompany, to walk with, to support those who are struggling with infertility and loss, especially loss in the context of infertility. And, you know, obviously, infertility is not something that just a person struggles with on their own. So, you know, we minister to couples because it's really a cross that a husband and wife carry together. Now, exactly how they carry it differently. One might carry it, you know, kind of badly, or, you know, really need more support. That sort of varies. But this is really a shared cross. That being said, many women find us on their own and come to us initially. Sometimes they'll then invite their husbands and they'll participate and receive from the ministry. But we do have a lot of women who come and find us on their own, because it's generally women who are feeling very emotional, really feeling the burden in a particular way that causes them to just seek out support. And so we at Springs in the Desert want to be that place of support, of respite, you know, to kind of try to lay aside that burden and just be a part of a community with other people who understand the isolation, the sadness, the anger, the jealousy, and all of those things. And just to mention also that our mission is very distinct from other infertility ministries in that we focus on Christ, not conception. So we're not the place where you would come to find out about diets that optimize fertility, for example, or, finding doctors who can help. We will certainly answer any of those questions. But sometimes you're just so burdened by the inability to have children. And that's so hard, and the isolation and all of those other things. And then when you layer treatments, charting, meds on top of that, it can just really be exhausting. And so we want Springs in the Desert to be a place where you can kind of set that aside and not feel that pressure and just come to receive.
Yeah, thank you. Anything you'd like to add to that, Kimberly?
Yeah, I mean, the way that we've found to best accompany people going through this struggle, because some people are kind of reluctant to call or to maybe even come to a retreat. We have a podcast that is so many people have told us is just like a lifeline, and it's just such a comfort, and it's like having a friend with you on this journey. So people initially will come to us perhaps on the referral of oh, hey, I heard this beautiful podcast that you might find interesting. So that would be like a soft way to sort of introduce the ministry to somebody who's struggling. And then as people begin to listen to the podcast, primarily women, but as they begin listening, they think they start to feel like these are my people. And so we offer small groups, offer events during the year, some virtually, and then we're also doing in-person retreats for various dioceses. And so we'll have women come be a part. We just had a Lenten small group series that was very beautiful, and just so beautiful to see such healing happening in this community. And so we've just seen somebody who perhaps was afraid to even mention it, afraid to talk about it with anybody, feeling and maybe they came to the first small group session and maybe kept their camera off, and they just sat there and observed, but then slowly they start to turn their camera on, and then they start to say a few words, and then they really open up and they feel like heard, seen, understood. And we see such beautiful healing taking place, because that's really, we want to help women and couples see that this is a legitimate grief. Infertility is a grief, even if you haven't actually miscarried or lost a child. The experience of infertility is a real grief, a real suffering, and we want to help them to move through that grief and to express the sadness and the anger and the frustration, and realize, try to help make sense of all of their emotions, their jealousy when they hear that their sister is expecting, their reluctance to go to a baby shower. And they're just feeling all this guilt, like, why can't I, just be there for my sister or be there for my friend? I'm so selfish. And then, piling up the condemnation on yourself as well. When we help to show that a lot of times, like, this is like your grief. This is your grief being expressed. And that kind of gives them, I think, permission to say, maybe I can't go to this baby shower right now. Or maybe they can say, hey, will you guys really pray for me? Because I really want to go to the shower and I just need this encouragement and support. And we do, we pray and we pile on the encouragement, and then, she can come back and then we embrace her as a community. So it's just having that support along the journey.
Well, that's a great lead into one of the questions I wanted to ask. And Ann and I talked a little bit about this last week when we were getting to know one another, and I was getting to know the organization. And it had to do with something that Ann said she had learned, and Kimberly, maybe you as well, that there are a lot of people struggling with infertility, which is something, you don't know by looking. So you may not be aware of the amount of people who are struggling. And further, if you do, people generally want to help. Sometimes they may say or do something that isn't received as well, just because they're not aware of the emotions that that person might be feeling. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about the fact that infertility is it's happening, and people are suffering, and then some advice for how you would tell someone, some advice for approaching and being supportive of someone who has suffered from infertility.
Yeah, thanks so much for that question, because I think oftentimes we don't realize how prevalent infertility is. It's approximately 1 in 5 couples who will struggle to get pregnant. And, sometimes we think that's just sort of part of the culture, right? It's the air we breathe, do what you want, live your life, don't be burdened by children or other things if that's not kind of what you're into. And so even within the church, some people might make presumptions. They might presume that a couple is contracepting, for example, because they simply don't want to have children. Or they just kind of say, well, mind my own business, and they don't think about it. And that can kind of contribute to the isolation that a couple might feel especially when they're in their parish, and you're looking around the pews and you see families and children, and Mother's Day comes up and the priest is going on and on about the gift of motherhood, which is absolutely true. It is a gift, but if you're carrying this particular cross, it can be so difficult. Even within our own parish families. And so that's one place that we really try to create an impact and create some awareness, is within our parishes and among our pastors. My brother is actually a Byzantine Catholic priest in the Eparchy of Passaic. And so I know a lot of priests as a result. And when we were going through our infertility, so many of them were just so supportive and prayed for us and all of that. But that's kind of as far as it went. And that's great. I mean, one thing I would say, if you want what's a positive way to support a couple, is to pray for them and to let them know that you're praying for them. But I felt oftentimes like these priests, as well-meaning as they were, just wanted to take the pain away. They wanted to find a solution. They wanted to, find a way to help us get our baby. And, again, that's a great intention, but it puts the focus on sort of achieving something that we might begin to feel, is out of our reach for whatever reason. Are we being punished by God? Does he not love us? Does he think we wouldn't be good parents? So I would say one thing for pastors in particular, to know that there are couples in your pews who are carrying this burden, that oftentimes they may not come to you because they don't know how to ask for support. They're not really sure how you will respond. But if they do, certainly pray for them, listen to them, hear what they're saying, what they need from you. Resist that temptation to offer advice, to jump right to pray to this saint, do this novena. Again, all of that stuff is really good, but it sort of puts this focus on, if you do the right things, you will get the result. Affirm that couple, acknowledge that this is hard. I know how hard this must be for you. I know that it must be a pain in your hearts. I'm here for you. I'm praying for you. I can support you in any way that you need. And then affirm them. I want you to know that your marriage is so good, that God loves you so much. If you are feeling like he's punishing you, or he's just arbitrarily choosing not to give you this gift, know that that's not true. Your marriage is worth so much, and it's so important to the life of the church and to this parish. So those are just some things I think that can help our pastors who often just don't know how they can support us.
Thank you for that. Kimberly, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I was going to say that another sort of aspect of what we focus on at Springs in the Desert is helping the couples to find the fruitfulness that God has for them. So to say, how Anne was talking about just affirming that goodness of the couple, but also to affirm in them that God is with them right now in the midst of this, that, not only has he not forgotten you, but he actually has a really beautiful plan for you, for your marriage. And, a lot of times the older I get, the more I begin to really realize that the heavier crosses that the Lord allows us to carry are because he has a greater blessing for us, which I know that's very hard to wrap your brain around. And it doesn't feel that way when you're suffering, but to see that, there's this gift of radical availability that a couple has that who does not have children. They are available to sort of see where the Lord is calling them. He could be calling them to go be missionaries in Peru, I don't know, or to go, maybe foster or adopt like my husband and I did, or to help out in the parish in some other capacity, to start a nonprofit like Anne. Anne and I have done this nonprofit to accompany other people struggling, to help your elderly family members who, have nobody else to take care of them. I mean, there's just so many areas that I think a lot of times we become, very focused on, we just want the child, and the danger of that is that I don't want to say, you're making an idol of the child, because it's a very natural, beautiful desire, of course, but I think about in the context of being open to foster, that was a very scary step for my husband and I, because here, we bring a child into our home who may not stay. But I'll tell you, that experience of fostering really, I believe, gave us a more true understanding of what it means to really be a mother and a father, to love a child completely selflessly for themselves, not for anything I'm getting out of it. It's all, to love that child as a gift from God for themselves. And for me, that was a really important lesson, because I think that, it's very easy to fall into that tendency of this child's going to fulfill me. And, and of course a child is, a child is a total gift and a joy and a blessing and all of that. And there is this sense of fulfillment of this desire for motherhood and fatherhood, but it's not something I think that we should seek out in that direction, with that kind of notion of, I want a child at all costs. I don't care what's going to happen. I don't care about the birth mother. I don't care about what's going on with that. I just want the child. And that, and it could push people into IVF and all other sort of things. I don't care the way that we have to go about this. I don't care if this isn't, accepted by the church. We have to do everything at all costs. And even if they're doing it in an illicit way, it could be I have to do every possible surgery. I have to take every possible medication that the doctor recommends. I have to, totally change my diet and eat only anti-inflammatory, and it become so, and time every relation with my husband so that it's and that pressure, it's it can distort the whole parent to child relationship, and really make us crazy.
Yeah, well, thank you for that as well. One of the things that, we want to do, one of the reasons we wanted to have you on, is to help you promote the ministry. So, at the end of the video, we'll post your website and your social media pages. I looked at some of your videos; they're fantastic. Podcasts, some really compelling stories that are just, fantastic. And I would encourage anybody who's seeing this to go and check out the videos on the Springs in the Desert website and the podcast. But maybe you can talk about, before we conclude, some ways that, you raise awareness, some of the things you use as, tools and resources to help raise awareness about your organization, and how you partner with, dioceses and parishes and pastors, so that anyone who's seeing this and is asking themselves, how can we connect with Springs in the Desert? You can share some of those thoughts. So we're gonna, we'll push this video out. Hopefully, a lot of people will be seeing it. So use this opportunity to talk about how we can build awareness for your organization.
Yeah, thanks for that. So, our mission is, first of all, focused on the people who are carrying this cross of infertility and loss. And so, Kimberly mentioned the website, for example. So we have a lot of resources. We have our blog, which gives an opportunity for people to write and share their stories. And then when you hear other people's stories, a lot of times it will connect with you, or you'll just see sort of a different side of infertility or fruitfulness that will kind of open up your heart and your horizons. And then we have the podcast, and truly one of our listeners described it as that friend that you can take along with you on your path of infertility. And I think that's probably the best endorsement we could have ever gotten. And so again, it's another one of those sort of soft landings. If you are not sure you're ready to connect yet, it's very hard to open up about this kind of struggle. There's a lot of shame associated with it. Of course, there doesn't have to be, there should not be, but it's just one of those feelings that comes along with this particular burden. And so that's a way to receive that accompaniment. And then the online virtual events that we have periodically throughout the year, and then retreats that we do all around the country. And so those are all ways to get involved, to email us directly, to ask for prayer. We have a weekly email called the Weekly Well. And so we invite people to give us their prayer requests. And that's a way for us to draw together as a community and to lift each other up in prayer. And so we want to, first of all, serve those who are on this path of infertility, wherever they are on the path. And then we do want to create that awareness, especially within the church. And so we have a number of resources on our website. If you go to springsinthedesert.org, you can find resources specifically for pastors or for doctors. We have a lot of little brochures and takeaways. You can put them in an office. And so those are all available. And then we're always open to partnering with dioceses to help support them in their efforts. Because I worked in a family life office, I understand that oftentimes they're working on a shoestring. There are not many people on staff. And so we can kind of guide them through different steps to support. So it may, first of all, mean just putting a web page on your website. Specifically for infertility. It's amazing how just that simple action means so much when infertility is not just listed among the NFP resources, but if it has its own page. We have a guide that can show you how to put that together. We can do webinars. We can come on and do a webinar for, marriage prep teams or ministers in family life or the Respect Life office. And then we can also talk about in-person events, doing a retreat, for example. We do retreats for women alone and also for couples, and we can do a full day or an overnight. So there's a lot of different ways that Springs in the Desert can support the efforts of pastors and of diocesan leaders as well. And we're always developing new resources. We have our clergy toolkit that we're preparing to launch that's going to have resources because we know that Father wants to help us. He wants to be there and support and walk with us us, but sometimes he just doesn't know how. And so we want to be that support. We want to advocate for the people who are coming to us, who are carrying this burden, and not only support them, but support those who want to walk with them.
So with that, I'd like to, say thank you for joining us today. It's really been great to get to know you and to get to know your organization. We're going to end with a little fun here at the end. I have 5 questions for each of you. We're talking about a serious subject here, so we thought we'd end with a little bit of fun. So let's get at it. Anne, why don't we start with you?
Okay.
5 questions. Advent or Lent?
Lent.
Christmas or Easter?
Easter.
Favorite devotion or prayer?
Praying the Psalter.
If you could have dinner with 3 saints, who would they be?
St. John Paul II, St. Mary of Egypt, and St. Teresa of Avila.
Now, this question sort of sounds incomplete without asking why. But maybe we could do that another time, really get into, why, you picked those, and I'm sure Kimberly will have her own. And then finally, when you get to heaven, what is the first thing you'd like to hear God say to you?
And I've been waiting for you.
All right. You ready, Kimberly?
Okay, let's do it.
Advent or Lent?
I'm also Lent.
Okay. Christmas or Easter?
Easter.
Favorite devotion or prayer?
Jesus, I surrender myself to you. Take care of everything. So I say the surrender novena every single night before I go to bed.
Okay.
I love it.
If you could have dinner with 3 saints, who would they be?
St. John of the Cross, St. John Paul II, I have to say him, and St. Therese of Lisieux, my patron saint.
Okay. And finally, when you get to heaven, what is the first thing you'd like to hear God say to you?
Welcome to the party, Kimberly. Look at all these people that you helped bring here.
That's great.
That was a good answer.
Really? Well, you both have been great. It's been great getting to know you, and thanks again for being on with us.